I'm Soundfounder, and this is KUTX at Home. Today we have a very special guest. Ernest Greene, better known as Washed Out, is here celebrating his fourth full-length studio album called Purple Noon. Welcome, Ernest. Where are you joining us from?
I'm here in my studio, a very messy studio in Atlanta, Georgia. We've been doing a lot of kind of live at home band gigs, and I've been doing some DJing. So behind me, you might not be able to see it, but it's just piles of equipment and other junk.
Awesome. Is your studio in your home or is it a separate space?
It is, yeah. It's just basically a bedroom. It's nothing super fancy, but it has my computer where I do 90% of my recording these days. So yeah, pretty simple.
Great. I'm just going to jump right into it and start talking about one of the tracks off the new album. The new video is called Time to Walk Away. It's really beautiful video, very emotional. So I'm wondering if you could give us a little insight into the lyrics and the video. Was the video specifically told to tell the story of the song, or how did that all come together?
Sure. Yeah. The story, with the lyrics is, it's about a relationship kind of falling apart, and, the couple's kind of asking the question, should they just try to one last go at it or just maybe try something new? And, with the COVID era, it's been quite difficult to make, music videos, particularly the grand narratives that I had in mind, when I was putting the songs together. A big part of the album making process for me is sort of this sort of escapist quality and like world building that happens mainly in my head, I guess. But it's so we had ambitions to do something else with the video, but they kind of fell apart as traveling and things got shut down. And I spent a decent amount of time online just kind of looking for inspiration, maybe some directors to potentially work with. And I came across this short film by this Australian director named Riley Blakeway. And I was kind of blown away. First off, the look of it was really great. It's shot in 16 millimeter film. And so it has this nice kind of warm, nostalgic feel to it. But just the storyline immediately, in my eyes, just fell right in line with, the lyrics of the song. And so it really didn't even take, we ended up reaching out to him and he offered to do kind of a re-edit of his film to fit the music video format a little better. But it really didn't take much editing at all. Maybe just kind of shortening things here and there. But
so it was already a film that was made beforehand?
Yeah. And we're super lucky that he was open-minded about the whole situation. And I think it turned out really well. So yeah, I felt super lucky, but it's, everything along the way has been a challenge for sure to get something made.
Awesome. Well, I think it turned out great. I think it's perfect. I think I really was impressed by it. Let's talk a little bit about your creative process, because yours is really interesting. My normal show that I do is an electronic music show. So the world of producers, and I've made music out of samples, and that's kind of the world I come from. So I initially got to know you as a sample bass earlier in your career. Mm-hmm. And I know your first couple albums were almost entirely done with samples and stuff. And then you started moving towards more live instrumentation. So I wonder, where on the spectrum does Purple Noon fall? How much electronic and how much live instrumentation do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, the last record I did, Mr. Mellow, was almost entirely made of samples. And if you're familiar with that approach, it sounds like you are, it's like putting together like a jigsaw puzzle, mm-hmm. Without really even having any of the pieces a lot of the time. It just takes a long time. It's quite frustrating. So I knew I wanted to do something a bit different this go around. So I actually wrote the songs kind of sitting at a keyboard before really diving too deep into production, which is pretty new to me. But in the end, it ended up being sort of like this hybrid approach. Most of I would say probably 80% of the instrumentation was still done like in the computer, like an electronic musician would do. But at the very end of the process, I did record some live drums and, played some like bass guitar here and there, a little bit of acoustic guitar, little things like that. But yeah, it was quite a different approach. I think it like focused the songwriting a bit more, kind of, concentrating on the melodies first and foremost. Everything else I've done has been like just sort of building this sonic texture, and then at the very end of the process, turn it into a song,
Mm-hmm.
So, but each way has its own kind of pros and cons, I'd say.
True. So you start out washed out at its core is just you, but when you perform live, you're usually with a band,
Mm-hmm.
if not always nowadays.
Yeah.
At what point do you bring other musicians into the mix? Are they involved in the album, or are they just there to fill out the live experience, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's mainly live. I've been playing since Mr. Mello. We've been kind of working as a three-piece. It's me and two other guys. And it's worked fairly well. And the guitar player did come in and play a couple things on this new record. But most of the drum sounds were kind of sample-based, really. So the fun / really frustrating part is like figuring out after the fact how to turn these like computer recordings into like, something a band can play.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily the two guys are really great musicians, and they can kind of take, my simplified parts and sort of breathe life into them. So it tends to work out pretty well, I'd say. Of course, if we could afford to have like, a 6 or 7 piece band, that would be great. A lot of my songs do have quite a bit going on, but this sort of 3-piece setup feels like the best of both worlds.
Awesome. Do you feel like that's more challenging with your older songs that were kind of more of a collage of samples and stuff? You feel like it's more challenging to present those live now?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we try to do things like, instead of just being hunched over like a sampler,
mm-hmm.
Which is quite a small little device. We often have been playing samples with like drumsticks and like bigger sample pads, just to give a little bit more of like a visual to the audience to like understand, oh, this sound is coming from this device. But it's gotten to the point now where like the drum kit that our drummer uses, it's like he has triggers on all of his acoustic drums, and it's like very much this hybrid thing where it's very rare that it's just like acoustic drums. There's all kinds of reinforcements and stuff happening that bring it more into the world of the way the records sound.
Yeah, I was watching some of the performance videos you sent us, and it's really impressive how just the drums can sound so much like a drum machine, and then you see your team.
Yeah, it's all triggers.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's great. So lyrically, I wanted to ask you, most of your lyrics, a lot of them are very emotional about relationships and love, or just general things that bring up a sentimental feeling, I guess you could say.
Sure.
How much of your lyric writing is specific to your life, and how much of it is just general thoughts? Like, are you telling a story about something that happened to someone somewhere, or are your songs about yourself?
Yeah, I would say like maybe 75% of the songs are about something that I had personally dealt with. It might be 10 years ago, a story from like a past love affair or something. But I'm quite old now and quite boring, to be honest. So it's a lot of looking backwards. But yeah, and then there has been some things filtering in, just because my life is quite simple. I feel like I read about, writers kind of eavesdropping in on their friends or even strangers' conversations and kind of using that in their work. That certainly happens to some degree with my songs, for sure.
Cool. So the one thing I would say, I guess, that flows, if you go all the way back to the late 2000s and listen to your MySpace stuff, and then up to now, there's definitely a vibe of kind of, I would call it like sentimentality in your music. Like it pulls this emotion that makes me almost like miss something that I don't even know what I'm missing. Like it takes you back. Like every time, for those that don't know, Washed Out is the opening song on Portlandia. And that was, just that feeling alone. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like, it makes you sentimental for something that you don't even know what you're sentimental for. It's just a feeling.
Sure.
And I wanted to know, how do you, because you're doing such different processes, you're using old samples, which can obviously pull sentimental feelings out because they sound old, and then you're using new stuff. Do you have a certain process that you work through to attain that feeling and that vibe? Or is it something that you consciously, or is it just something that comes as music comes out?
Yeah, I think to some degree, it's pretty natural. I'm not a trained musician or a producer really. And so in a lot of ways, the stuff that I make, just sounds like what I do. But I will say, when I'm working on something, say, with this record, it's like sitting down the piano or a keyboard and writing chords or whatever, like I feel like I'm onto something when I start to get those feelings myself. And I felt like you put it really pretty plainly. It's like not necessarily any one memory. It's just, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's almost like the hairs on the back of my neck sort of, stand up, and you just, all of a sudden you're feeling something. So that sounds super vague, but yeah, it's hard to obviously describe. As you know, songwriting is like feeling around in the dark, particularly when it comes to like sonic textures and stuff. And so, yeah, it's all of a sudden you feel like, okay, there's something here. And then it's just kind of fine tuning that feeling through finishing the song,
Cool. And so that takes me to the song on your new album called Face Up, which was definitely something that kind of carried that vibe really heavily for me. Honestly, this song, listening to it, I listened to it a few times this morning, and I don't know if this has ever occurred to you, but it really reminded me of like Sade in some ways. Are you a fan of hers? Did that occur to you?
Yeah. She was a big influence on this record. In a lot of ways, I was trying to kind of enter a mindset that was very much like her world,
Wow.
It makes me think of like luxurious European beach resorts or something in the best way possible. But of course I didn't want to do anything that was like, too obvious. And I certainly wanted to kind of take a modern spin on that approach. So that was the challenge. But yeah, I would say like her music, and there were some other kind of like 80s synth ballads, something like the Cars, like Drive. That song was something I was really into. And again, like the challenge was bringing that style song into the current day. But yeah, those both Sade stuff and some of those synth ballads just have this nice like glossy texture to them that I really love. And there's the obvious kind of sentimentality that's there, that's very sincere and real. And so I was definitely trying to kind of channel all of that.
Well, I felt it. Yeah, it's a great track. So I want to talk to you a little bit about labels, because you've done most of your stuff on Sub Pop, which is, for those that don't know, Sub Pop, it's got a name for itself with Nirvana and Soundgarden, and then it's moved on to artists like Beach House and Fleet Foxes, and they're an amazing roster. And then you've also done an album on Stone's Throw, which is one of my favorite labels of all time. Started as a hip hop label, and now has branched out into other funk and kind of modern synth music and stuff. And then you've also had a EP on Mexican Summer, which is my favorite psych rock label. So I guess I want to talk to you a little bit. I think that speaks so much to your music, as you can fit in a indie and kind of grunge label. You can fit in with a label that started as hip hop, and you can fit in with a psych rock label, and it all makes sense. I wanted to, I guess, talk to you a little bit about, how do you decide what label you're going to work with, and how does that affect your process, if at all?
Sure. Again, it's all kind of worked out pretty naturally. I think the Stone's Throw connection with Mr. Mello was probably the most obvious situation where like that was kind of the one home that I felt like where it needed to be. I they're one of my favorite labels of all time, and they're a lot of the artists from that label were a big part of kind of shaping my sensibility as a musician, and particularly very early on with the Watched Out thing. So when I was actually putting that record together, I very much had them in mind. I didn't know anyone over there personally, but luckily got some introductions and it ended up working out. But I like to say that record was kind of my love letter to the label in a lot of ways.
Oh,
And then with Sub Pop, I feel like this record was kind of made for them in a lot of ways. I feel like it's a bit more accessible for just a wider range of people, which again, I think Sub Pop has kind of grown into, they're one of the big indie labels out there, have a pretty far reach. So it felt appropriate for them. And Mexican Summer sort of pulled me out of obscurity in a lot of ways. I was getting a little bit of online buzz, but yeah, they heard some of my stuff very early on and reached out. And again, luckily I was a huge fan of theirs before them reaching out, and it worked out really well, our relationship together. So yeah, I've been very lucky. I'm really bad at business and promoting myself, and I get young fans all the time ask me like, what do you do to get discovered? And luckily, it's all like I'm extremely lucky where so much of my career has just sort of like fallen into my lap in a lot of ways. So the labels I've worked with are again just like complete luck mostly.
awesome. So did you finish this whole album before the pandemic, or were you trying to wrap it up, or how did that play out?
Yeah, I've been finished for quite a while actually. And I mean, it honestly wouldn't have changed a ton. Like I've wrote it pretty much, wrote and recorded probably 90% of everything here. And then finished everything at a studio here in Atlanta that's not far from here. So, so in a lot of ways, I am used to this lifestyle of being at home. I have two kids, and I'm used to them being crazy and dealing with that. But yeah, I'd say like a lot of the, as I kind of alluded to earlier, like getting music videos made and obviously touring has been, super difficult to sort of figure out any sort of schedule that could possibly make sense.
Mhm.
So it's a lot of going back to the drawing board with that kind of things multiple times, but lucky to be here and to have new music to put out, and the reception so far has been really good. It's been a number of years since I put out a record, so I think people, the fans are excited generally.
Great. How has your outside of music and work, how has your quarantine situation been, and what are some, what is stuff that you do for fun outside of music? What are your interests?
There's very little time. I mean, I work, I mentioned how boring, I work pretty much 9 to 5 here in this room. And then, yeah, it's mainly just kind of entertaining kids after that. Kind of quarantining for us means lots of like hiking and biking and just being outdoors, which feel lucky to be able to do that. We live in Atlanta, but in a pretty nice area where there's lots of nature and stuff. Yeah, that pretty much covers it. I mean, I'm like a huge like movie nerd, and I'm so much of all of my hobbies relate to Washed Out in some way. Like I'm into photography, so I do a lot of the design and stuff for Washed Out. So I find that even if I'm not working on music, I'm probably working on something Washed Out related.
Oh, that's great. Sounds like a dream come true. Awesome. Well, it's been awesome having you on. Thank you very much, Ernest. I I think that about covers all my questions,
Great.
and I appreciate you taking time to sit down and do this. And I
Sure. Yeah. My
hope
pleasure.
to talk to you again in the future.
No doubt. Yeah. Thanks, man.